Good morning, everyone. Today is day 9 of Make Your Own Sourdough Starter with me. By day 9, your starter should be doing pretty good. This is my starter. It's got some great bubbles. It smells wonderful this morning. It's even just a little bit more acidic than it was yesterday. But I want to show you something that I did. You can see some marks here. Before we fed our starter this morning, I wanted to talk about testing the starter. So I want you to look at this photo here. Yesterday, in the morning after we fed our starters and I was done with the live video, I put my starter on the counter, and every 2 hours I took a picture. So you can see where the 0 was. That was when the starter was first fed. And then 2 hours later, it was not quite doubled, but almost. And then at 4 hours, it was over double. And so you can see the starter is gaining pretty well in strength, and it's over doubling. So that's really good. You can see here, that was at the 4 hour mark. That was just another picture that I took of it because I wanted to, that was at the time when the starter peaked. And by saying peaked, what I mean is the highest that the starter will go in the jar before it starts falling. And so at hour 4, it peaked because at hour 5, I came back and I noticed that it was about the same or a little bit lower, and then at hour 6 it had fallen. So I actually still have those marks on my jar. Then last night I went ahead and fed it again, and so this morning it's been about 12 hours since I fed it. But what I wanted to talk about was that when you're making a starter, let's see if I can get this. There we go. There, now I'm back. What I wanted to talk about was when you test your starter, you're making a starter and it's been 9 or 10 days or 11 days, and you want to test your starter to see how good it's doing. And so go ahead and feed it the amount that you are normally feeding it, or you might want to feed it a little bit more just so you can see it in the jar a little easier. And mark it at the 0 right after you feed it. And then every 1 to 2 hours, if it's really growing a lot in 1 hour, go ahead and mark it every hour. But if it's growing slowly, mark it every 2 hours and see where it will peak. And you need to set your timer to make sure that you stay on time and that you have some good data there. But you mark it where it peaks, and then where it falls. And this morning you can see it's at the 2 hour level. So after 12 hours, it hasn't fallen all the way back to 0. It's peaked and then it's fallen back to the 2 hour point. So I wanted to talk about testing too. Now my starter here might be able to make a loaf of bread today, but I would really like to see this starter here. I would like to see this not a 4 but a 6. An average starter, the peaking time is around 6 hours, and a lot of the formulas are actually made for an average starter. If you have a quicker starter that will peak at 4 hours and then start falling, then you have to realize that the formulas that are for 24 hours, 48 hours, the extreme formulas, that are 3 days long, they're not going to work with a short peaking starter, because by the time you need your bread to go in the oven, your starter's oomph is going to be gone. So that's all part of stabilizing the starter. I'm hoping to see over the next 3 or 4 days this starter peak all the way at maybe the 6 hour point. If it doesn't, and it might not, then that means I have a starter which is really good for 1 day breads and for all kinds of other things like cakes and biscuits and pancakes. But I would want to just keep in my mind that if it peaks at 4 hours, that I need to mainly use it for sourdough formulas that are a bit on the shorter side. I would want to do a bread that's more like a 4-hour proof instead of a 5 or 6 hour. And I'm talking about the bulk proof, the first proof after you mix your dough. You would want to keep it to more like a 4-hour bulk proof instead of a 5 or a 6-hour bulk proof. So just keep that in mind. But this isn't the final story. We have to go ahead and test it again in maybe, another 3 or 4 days and see how it's doing at that time. Maybe at that time it will peak in 6 hours. So we'll just wait and see. So we'll go ahead and feed our starter today. Oh, I just wanted to show you how it looks too. It's nice and bubbly. It smells great. It is acidic smelling because it needs to be fed. And your starter can smell like acetone, or it can smell very strong. The longer you leave it without being fed, the stronger it will smell. Now, if your starter's not doing very well still, I'd recommend that you check your water or your flour source. Maybe change out your, I'll put a little bit more back. Maybe change out your water source or your flour. Go get a new bag of flour and see if that will help. Another thing is, until it starts fermenting really good, you're going to want to not take out as much starter. I left in about 30 grams, just a little bit in the bottom. I don't know if you can see that or not. Just a little bit in the bottom. But if your starter's not bubbling and fermenting, discard only about half of it so that you have more left in the jar. Okay, I'm going to be putting in 60 grams of water, the same as we have the last several days. Just a little bit more. Okay, and I'm going to be using my flour mixture, all-purpose and whole wheat, so it's 50% all-purpose and 50% whole wheat flour. Let me tear out my scale. Okay. Now I'll mix it nice and vigorously. Now yesterday when I put it on the counter to test it, I went ahead and scraped down the sides so that I could see. And when I was done with that, I took a paper towel and I went in there, moistened it slightly, and then I just wiped down the sides a little so I could see better. So you might want to do that if you're going to try to test it today. So it would be really great if you guys went ahead and tested your starters and posted on Perfect Sourdough or in the comments below what hour your sourdough starter peaked at. It'll be fun to see the different times for everybody. So I've just fed it. It's doing really well. I'm real happy with it. And that should be all for today. I'll see if there's any questions to answer. And I just want to let you know that tomorrow I'm going to show you how to prepare a starter for freezing. So we'll do that tomorrow. So let me check on questions. Okay. Well, there's actually several questions this morning. Jerry Frost, what is the best way to dispose of the leftover starter you discard each day? Pour it down the sink drain, or is there a less messy way? You do not want to pour your starter down your sink drain. You don't want that in your plumbing. Just like in the jar, the starter will settle to the bottom. Sometimes there's liquid at the top. And in your plumbing, it'll do the same thing. Only when When a starter or flour hardens, it's like concrete. You do not want to have your plumbing filled up with starter that is like a sludge. So put it in the compost bin, use it as a discard for making something, feed it to your chickens, put it in the trash can if you have to, but do not pour it down your plumbing. You can also just dig a hole in your backyard and discard it there if you want. Sometimes when I have oil that needs to be discarded, I will do that too. You don't want oil in your plumbing either. So that was from Jerry. Hi Irene, I mix my discard with the hen's feed or put it on the compost. I'm saving it now to mix with some whole wheat flour and bake it for giving to the birds. Well, that's a great idea. Take your discard, make some pancakes or some flatbread and crumble it up and give it to the birds. Cheyenne, I fry the discard with some sesame and make some pancakes really nice with some soy dipping sauce. Another really great idea. Mixing it with an egg and a little milk and some salt and making some crepes is another idea. Sherry, hi Sherry. This morning after 8 hours, the starter is really strong smelling, hungry. It's very active. Does it need to be fed more often than every 12 hours? You can always feed your starter more often if you'd like to. If you're just maintaining it and not using it, then you can actually pour out more than 30 grams. You can leave just 10 grams in your starter jar and go ahead and feed it a little bit more, more often. You can always feed your starter more if you like, but if you're just maintaining it, I would go ahead and Sherry, if I were you, I would just maybe keep 10 grams in the jar and feed it, the 60 or even 70 grams of starter if you think it's too strong smelling. Alexandra, when I feed my mature starter and leave it overnight, it peaks sometimes in the middle of the night. Is it still okay to use in the morning after peaking, or should I plan my timing differently? Alexandra, if I'm going to mix dough in the morning, I do feed my starter the night before, but I use a very low inoculation and leave it out at room temperature. So I might leave 20 or 30 grams in the starter jar and feed it 100 to maybe 130 grams of flour and water, depending upon how much my formula needed, and then it's usually pretty vigorous in the morning. If I'm going to mix dough later in the afternoon, like maybe around 2 o'clock or 4 o'clock, then I will feed my starter in the morning, and then I will time my mixing of my dough with where I want the starter to be. Like if I want to use the starter on the young side at 6 hours, I will just feed it about 6 hours before I mix. If I want to time it a little bit later, then I'll feed it about 8 hours or so before I mix. Sarthak, I have downloaded your Make Your Own Sourdough Starter book, and it's very well written and illustrated book, and it's a must-have. So I would recommend it to all to have a copy. Well, thank you so much. I have the book here. Anybody who hasn't seen it yet, this is my book, Make Your Own Sourdough Starter, and you can get it free on my websites. I have 2 websites, the Baking network.com and northwestsourdough.com, and if you sign up there, you can get a link for a free download, which then you can print it out. It's not a really large book, so you could print it out if you want. If you want a printed version, you can go to Amazon, and it's about $4 for a printed version. So thank you for that, Sarthak. And then hello, George. I see you said thanks as well. So that looks like that's all the questions for this morning. I hope all of you that your sourdough starter is doing really wonderful by today. If it's not and you're feeling down about it, well, don't feel down. You still need to remember that you need to change something. If your starter isn't working by day 9, you need to change something. You need to try a different water source or try some different flour. If by day 9 you should definitely be having some activity, so please change out something. and see if you may even need to start over, but try again and get a sourdough starter going. Once you get it going and it's fermenting well, you just need to feed it and wait for it to stabilize, and then you'll have a really wonderful sourdough starter to bake all kinds of really nice things with. So that's all for today. And remember, tomorrow we're going to prepare our sourdough starters for to be frozen. So we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.